So we are at our last lecture for the semester. So this is it. So I want to give everyone props for making it this far. It's not been an easy class, I know, but hopefully you guys have had a little bit of fun with it. So we'll go ahead and finish up with that, and we'll start on today's lecture. So let me know when you guys can see the PowerPoint. But in the meantime, just as a quick reminder, next week we are going to have our final exam. That is going to cover, it's going to be cumulative, so it's going to have a total of 75 questions. The first 40 questions are going to be from the new material. Okay, so from chapters 11 and chapter 19. Final exam. So like I said, 75 questions. There's going to be 40 questions from chapter 11 and chapter 19. And then the other 35 questions will come from the previous exams. So make sure that you're studying for that. That will be next week. It'll be up on Canvas. You can start taking it at, so it'll be next Tuesday, which is the 19th, I believe. So next Tuesday, and you can take it anytime between 8 a.m. To 11:59 p.m. Okay. So again, it has to be taken sometime during that window. If you don't submit the exam by 11:59, then I'll be forced to kind of give you a 0, and I don't want to do that on the final. Okay. So make sure that you complete it on time. I believe that's everything. There will be a couple extra credit questions as well, but I think that is everything. Yeah. Any questions on the final or anything that's coming up? Okay. All right, so that is the final exam. Like I said, that'll be up next Tuesday. So again, be ready for that, and try to be as prepared as you possibly can. Don't start studying it to the last minute, because that's going to put you in a terrible situation. So make sure at least studying a little bit every day, and then you should be good to go. Okay, in the meantime, or I guess if there's no questions, we'll go ahead and finish off with the last section, which is 19.4. So we did 19.1, 19.2, we're skipping 19.3, and we're going to finish up with 19.4 here. So this is going to be on community ecology. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the different types of interactions that various individuals within species and across species are going to be able to have with one another in these individual habitats. Okay, so we're going to be looking at communities, and so before we go further here, I had a quick review question from the first week of the semester. Kind of interesting that we're kind of coming full circle here. What is a community? Okay, how do we classify a community? Okay, so A is all the individuals of a species living within a specific area. B is a set of populations inhabiting a particular area. C, all the living and non-living things in a particular area. Or D, the collection of all the ecosystems on Earth. What is a community? Okay. So I'm seeing some C's, I'm seeing some A's, I'm seeing some A's. So both of those answers are incorrect. The answer is B. Okay, so good job, Tim. So the answer is B here. So a community is made up of all the populations living in a particular area. Okay, so let's kind of go back one step and let's think about what a population is. Okay, so a population is going to be all the individuals of a particular species living in some area. So it could be like a population of squirrels. You have a population of roses, a population of turtles. Okay, all those would be individual populations. So if you take all those populations and you put them in one area, okay, all those populations would comprise one community. Okay, so for example, a community might contain a population of squirrels, a population of roses, a population of turtles. Okay, all of that might be all contained within one community. Okay, so a community is a set of populations living in a particular area. Okay, so that makes sense so far. We're all on the same page here. Cool. Okay, cool. All right, good. Okay, so as we know, just whenever we look at a particular area, we're going to have multiple different populations living in there. Like if we just even look at our own backyards, okay, we might find some squirrels, we might find some birds, we're gonna find some grass, we might find some trees. So we're gonna have multiple species all living and coexisting in the same area. Okay, and so what we need to do as community ecologists is we want to be able to look at how all those individual species are going to be interacting with one another. Okay? How are the trees going to be interacting with the birds and vice versa? And how are the squirrels going to be interacting with the birds and so on and so forth? We want to be able to look at how all those individual species are going to be interacting with one another, because that'll give us an indication of what's going on in that community, and if we need to kind of step in to kind of help improve that particular community and ecosystem. Okay? So when we look at a particular area, there's going to be a certain number, a certain kind of a parameter that we're going to be looking for, and that is called the diversity. Okay, so the diversity is the number of species living in that particular habitat, okay, as well as the relative abundance, how much of them are present. Okay? So for example, we might have some high diversity communities that are going to have lots of different species occupying that particular space. Okay? In a low diversity area, there's going to be very few different species living in that particular space. Okay. So by looking at the diversity of each individual habitat, we're going to be able to understand exactly what kind of interactions may be taking place in that particular area. Okay. And again, as community ecologists, we want to be able to study how all those different interactions are going to be occurring and how these different species will be competing with one another for different resources too. Okay. So what we're going to be doing first is we're going to be looking at a few different interactions that these various species can have with one another. And so the first one is predator-prey relationships, or kind of predation here. Okay. And so as we know, predators are going to be individuals that are going to kill individuals of another population. Okay. So for example, here we're looking at a hare over here, and then a lynx over here. Okay. So the lynx is going to be the predator, the hare is going to be the prey. So the lynx populations are going to be the individuals that are going to be killing and eating the hare populations. Okay, so that's what we see with predator-prey interactions there. Okay. Now the population sizes of the hare and the lynx are not going to be stable over time. They're going to be kind of shifting, and they're going to be not stable. They're going to be kind of always changing. And that changes are usually going to be cyclical. Okay, they're usually going to be pretty cyclical, and we'll take a look at what that looks like in a second. So their population sizes are not going to be stable. They're going to be constantly changing depending on what's happening in that particular habitat. Okay. So what we kind of see here is we see the numbers of hares and lynx over a 100-year period from the mid 1800s to the mid 1900s. And so what they found was that the relative numbers of the hares and the lynx, it was not constant. It was pretty fluid, and it was happening in these cycles. Okay, it would increase and then it would decrease, and it would increase again, then it would decrease again. So as we kind of look at what these predator-prey relationships look like, one of the things that we'll see is that, for example, in this case, the hare populations, the prey here, when their populations increase, okay, the lynx population will also increase as well, which we see right here. Okay, so the hare population is in red. The lynx population is in blue. Okay, so as the hare populations increase, the lynx population also increases with a little bit of a lag time. Okay. And the reason for the lynx populations increase is because of the availability of food. Okay. The more hares there are, the more lynx there can be, okay, in that particular environment, because there's going to be more resources for food available. Okay. So more prey, you're going to be able to have more predators because you have more food available. Okay. Now, at the same time, when those lynx populations begin to increase, then what we see is the hare populations begin to decrease here. Okay, and the reason for that is because of predation. Okay, the more lynx that you have, okay, the more predation is going to occur, and so the lynx population is going to start to decline. Okay. Or sorry, the hare population is going to begin to decline here. Okay. So as the lynx begin to eat them, okay. Then as the hare populations begin to decline again, then what's going to happen is the lynx population is going to decline because there's not as much food available. Okay, the hare populations declined. That was their food source. If their food source becomes limited, then the lynx population is also going to have to decline as well and kind of follow suit. Okay. And then the last thing that's going to happen is as the lynx populations begin to decline, okay, like we see here, then the hare populations are going to begin to jump up again. Okay, and again, that's going to be because of the lack of predation, because there's not as many lynx available, lynx around to eat them. Okay, the hare populations are going to begin to rebound back up. Okay, and then you start with this whole cycle all over again. And so this is typically how predator-prey relationships will look like in regards to their population sizes. They're typically going to happen in cycles, and they're going to be dependent on each other. Okay? The predator's population size is going to be dependent on the prey's population size, and vice versa. Okay? They're going to be dependent on one another to look at their population size here. Okay, so that's what predation would typically look like. Okay. So that being said, in order for predators and prey to be able to survive, they're going to need specific traits that allow them to be able to get away from their, or either get away from predators or for the predators to be able to catch their prey. Okay. So predation and predator avoidance are both going to be very strong selective agents. Okay. These are going to be very, very important things that are going to influence natural selection in that particular habitat. Okay. So for example, if we're looking at prey, the prey that have specific traits that allow them to be able to escape predators are going to be the ones that are going to be able to survive. And as a result, they're going to be able to pass on those same traits to their offspring. Okay. So for example, if you have a prey that has a trait that allows them to be able to move faster, okay, it's going to be easier for them to escape their predators. If they're going to have an easier time surviving and reproducing, and they're going to pass on those fast genes to their offspring. Now, the flip side of that is that predators will also need to have specific traits. Okay? So the predators that have traits that allow them to be able to catch their prey, again, are going to be the ones that will be able to survive more so than the ones that don't have those traits. Okay? And so as they catch their prey, they're going to be the ones that survive, and they're going to pass on those particular traits to their offspring too. Okay? So predators and prey both need to have specific traits to either be able to allow them to escape from predators or for the predators to be able to catch their prey. Okay. Does that part make sense? I think, is that any questions so far on that? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So in addition to that, one other thing that we're going to see here is that certain prey have evolved specific defense mechanisms, specific adaptations that can act as defense mechanisms to help them escape their predators or help them kind of engage in predator avoidance. Okay. And so these different types of defense mechanisms can be either mechanical, they can be physical, behavioral, or chemical. Okay. And so we'll take a look at some of these defense mechanisms. The first ones are these mechanical defenses. And so mechanical defenses are physical aspects or physical traits on that particular organism that prevents or discourages predation. It discourages a predator from trying to eat it. Okay. So for example, here we have an armadillo, and armadillo is going to have this shell. And so that shell is going to discourage predators from coming around and eating it, because if the predator tries to eat it, okay, it's going to basically break its teeth because of the hardness of its shell. Okay. In addition to that, some thorns on other plants will also help to discourage some predators as well. There's a number of other different types of factors that are going to be used to help discourage predation by a predator. The next ones are some chemical defenses. And so some animals and some plants will have different types of chemicals and toxins that they're going to be able to store in their bodies and in their cells. And so if they release those toxins, they can be potentially pretty harmful to the predator, whatever is eating it. Okay? And so those toxins essentially help to discourage the consumption of that particular plant, okay, or organism. Okay? So in this case here we have doll's eye plant. The doll's eye plant kind of takes on this color. It's got a red color and these eyes, or it's got these berries that almost look like little eyes. And so these particular plants have a toxin inside the berries that cause heart attacks. Okay? And so mammals, especially humans, need to stay away from these because if they eat these plants, okay, then it's game over from there. Like they're not going to survive it. Okay? So they'll cause cardiac arrest, and that's again going to be because of a toxin that gets stored inside this particular plant. Okay. body shape and then camouflage can also help as defense mechanisms too, by being able to, or by allowing that particular organism to blend in with its surroundings. Okay, so for example, here we have an owl, and so this owl has this specific coloration pattern on its feathers, and that's going to allow it to kind of fit into a little groove inside of a tree, and also be able to blend into the tree as well, and so it'll be able to escape from predators and not be seen. Okay. In the case of the lizard down here, okay, the lizard is going to be able to engage in camouflage, and so it will be able to blend in with the tree around it, and so it's not going to be able to be easily seen by predators as well. Okay. In the case of the stick bug up here, okay, the stick bug, its shape allows it to kind of blend in with its surroundings, along with its coloration pattern too, and so the shape helps it to kind of resemble a stick, and again, kind of be overlooked by a potential predator too. So camouflage is another way. Okay. Now, coloration patterns are also really important mechanisms of a defense, because the colorations, especially if an animal has bright colors, that's usually an indication that that particular animal is toxic, or predator or prey is toxic, okay, and that they're poisonous. Okay, and so some of these prey may be able to produce their own toxins. Or if they eat certain plants, they may be able to develop their own, or they may be able to acquire the toxins from the plant and store them within their bodies. Okay. So for example, here we have the yellow-bellied frog. As you can see, the yellow-bellied frog has this bright orange or yellow skin up on its belly. And so if the yellow-bellied frog comes into contact with a predator, what the frog will do is it will kind of jump up on its hind legs and show off and flash that yellow and bright colors. Okay, that bright color indicates that that animal is poisonous. Okay, so when it flashes that yellow belly, it's saying, "Hey, predator, you can come and eat me, but you're gonna die if you try." Okay, I'm pretty poisonous. You want to stay away from me. I'm not something you want to mess with. Okay, yeah, I'm not the one. Okay, so the yellow-bellied frog is going to be able to escape from predators that way by warning the predator that, "Hey, I'm poisonous. Don't try me." In the case of this snake over here. The snake is also going to have some bright colors, and again, same thing. It's going to be able to indicate that, hey, you can eat me, but if you try, you're probably going to die. And then caterpillars too. Caterpillars, as they're kind of growing, okay, they're going to be eating some plants, and they're going to be able to store some of the toxins from the plants inside their own bodies. And then when they go through metamorphosis and become a butterfly, okay, then those toxins actually get stored in the wings as these bright colors here. Okay. So these butterflies are also going to be relatively toxic as well. All right, cool. Okay, any questions so far on any of these? Okay, so then the next type of defense mechanism is mimicry. And so mimicry is where a non-poisonous organism will kind of mimic the coloration on a poisonous organism, and that helps to kind of trick a predator into thinking that it is poisonous when it's really not. Okay, and so to go and help to kind of discourage the predator from eating it here. Okay, so for example, here we have the poisonous coral snake. Okay? And so again, we can kind of see we got bright red and bright yellow colors, and then we also see the scarlet king snake, which again we'll see some bright red and yellow colors as well. Okay, but this one is not poisonous. And so the scarlet king snake kind of imitates the same coloration pattern, or a similar coloration pattern of the coral snake, okay, to kind of trick predators into thinking that the scarlet king snake is poisonous. Okay? And so even though it's really not poisonous, it's going to be able to, to trick the predators into thinking that it actually is. Okay? And so if you're ever going to go out hiking to try to figure out, and you come into contact with a snake and you're not sure if it's poisonous or not, one of the things that you're going to be able to look for is, the bright coloration pattern. Okay, if you see bright colors, you're going to think that it's most likely going to be poisonous. However, if you do see bright colors, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is, as we see with the king snake. So there is a particular kind of a trick here to kind of help you determine the poisonous of a snake, or the toxicity of a snake, I guess. So if you see red touches black, is safe for jack. Okay, red touches yellow, kills a fellow. Okay, so here we see red touching black. Okay. This is going to be pretty safe. It's not going to be poisonous. But if you see red touching yellow, that is going to be one that is going to be poisonous. Okay. So if you ever go into the woods, if you're hiking or camping or something and you see a snake, use this kind of trick. And this kind of help you to determine if it's poisonous or not. And if you forget this trick, sorry, I warned you, but apologize. Good luck. Okay, any questions on any of those defense mechanisms before we go forward here? No. Okay, cool. All right, so that is going to lead us into this next kind of principle. We're going to kind of shift gears here. And so this is the competitive exclusion principle. And so basically what happens is when we have multiple different species, okay, again, we're going to have multiple species occupying a specific habitat. Okay, we're going to have squirrels, we're going to have plants, we're going to have trees, we're going to have birds, we're going to have, all kinds of different things, gophers and wolves, whatnot. Okay, we're going to have lots of different species. Okay, now there's going to be competition for the resources available. Okay, and that the competition is not going to be just within individuals of the same species, but you're going to have multiple individuals of different species all competing for the exact same resources, right? So if you got a pond of water, right, you're not just going to have squirrels competing for access to the water. You're going to have squirrels, you're going to have hippos, you're going to have birds, you're going to have plants, you're going to have all kinds of different organisms all competing for that same resource. Okay? So multiple species are going to be competing for those resources. Okay, now that being said, each of those species is going to have what's considered an ecological niche. Okay? So a niche is an animal's role in that habitat. Okay, what is its job? What is its role? What is it going to be doing in that particular habitat? Okay? The niche is going to include the resources that that species can utilize, okay, as well as how it's going to interact with the other species that are present. Okay, so those are the two major components that are going to be found within each species' ecological niche. Okay, so the competitive exclusion principle tells us that if there are two species that occupy the same exact niche, they both cannot coexist. Okay? They both cannot coexist in the same area with one another if they occupy the exact same niche. If they compete for the same resources and the exact same resources, they cannot coexist with one another. One of them will drive the other into extinction. Okay? One of them is going to survive, the other one is not going to survive. Okay? So two species cannot occupy the same niche. Okay? If they do, one of them will survive, the other one will not. Okay? So that being said, if we have two species that do share a similar resource, or that do share a resource, I should say, one of the species is going to need at least one trait that reduces its reliance or reduces its dependency on that particular resource. Okay. If it has a trait that reduces dependency on that resource, okay, and so it's going to be able to utilize something else as a resource, that trait will be selected for, and that will allow both species to continue to live. Okay. However, if the two species cannot reduce their competition for that resource, then the species that is able to use that resource most efficiently and most effectively is going to be the one that survives. Okay. The one that doesn't use it as effectively or as efficiently is the one that will be driven into extinction. Okay. So again, they cannot occupy the same niche. Okay. If they do, one of the species is going to need a trait that allows it to use something else as a resource as well. Okay. So just kind of an example here is here we're looking at different species of paramecium. So here we have P. aurelia, P. caudatum, and then what happens if we grow them together. Okay. So if we take P. aurelia and we give it a specific resource, so let's say a specific food source, and we grow P. aurelia just by itself, okay, its numbers are going to grow and grow and grow. It's going to be able to survive and thrive in that particular habitat. Okay. If we do the same thing with P. caudatum in its own environment, okay, just P. caudatum there, again, you see the same thing. Okay, they're going to be able to utilize those resources, and its numbers are going to continue to increase over time. Okay. Now, if you take both P. aurelia and P. caudatum together and you put them in the same environment and have them compete for the same resources, okay, as we can see, P. aurelia is the one that survives. Okay, it's going to be able to thrive for a longer period of time. Okay. However, P. caudatum lives for a little bit, and then eventually its numbers decline until it's driven to extinction. Okay, so what that tells us is that P. aurelia is able to use the resource more efficiently. Okay, they're using the same resource, okay, but they both cannot use the exact same resource at this exact same time, okay, and both live. Okay, one of them is going to use it most effectively, and if it uses it most efficiently, that's going to be the one that survives. Okay, P. caudatum doesn't use it as effectively, and so because of that reason, it's not going to be able to outcompete P. aurelia for that resource, and it's going to be the one that ends up dying and going to extinction. Okay. Okay. Does this make sense? This is kind of a big concept here. Does this make sense here? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. So a quick example or a quick question here. We have bird species A and bird species B are both capable of eating bugs. Okay. Species A's beaks also allow them to eat seeds. Okay. So if species A begins to eat seeds as well as bugs, which species will go extinct? Okay. A, species A will go extinct. B, species B will go extinct. C, both species will go extinct. Or D, neither will go extinct. What do we think here? Kimberly says D, Christopher D, and that is indeed correct. Perfect. Yeah, good job, guys. So neither species will go extinct. And so the reason for that, actually, let me ask you guys, what's the reason? Why would neither species go extinct here? Exactly. Kimberly said there's two niches here. There's two niches. And so in species A is able to use bugs as well as seeds. Species B is only going to be using bugs. So they're going to occupy two different niches. Okay. Species A is able to use two different types of resources. Okay. As opposed to species B, which is only able to use bugs. Okay. So because species A is able to use two different resources, it doesn't necessarily need to compete with species B for that particular resource. So they're not going to be competing with one another to a great degree. And so as a result, neither one will go extinct. Good. Okay, next question. Again, species A and species B are both capable of eating bugs. Species A's beaks are more efficient for eating bugs, but both species must eat bugs. So which species will go extinct now? Okay. Species A, B, both, or neither? Which one will go extinct? So yes, the answer is species B. Exactly. Species B will go extinct. And again, the reason for that is because species A is going to be more efficient for eating bugs. Okay, so if it's more efficient, it's going to be able to eat more and more of those bugs. Species B is not going to be as efficient with it, so it's going to have a harder time getting access to those bugs as a resource. Good. Okay. So now kind of shifting gears a little bit here, but kind of in the same kind of vein. When we're looking at different species can have different interactions with one another. Okay, so these are what we call symbiotic relationships. So there's different types of symbiotic relationships, and these are going to be long-term relationships between individuals of different species. Okay, so we have three major types of symbiotic relationships. Okay, we've got commensalism, we have mutualism, and then we have parasitism, or parasitic relationships. So we're going to start by looking at commensalism or commensalistic relationships. And so a commensalism relationship is where you have one species that benefits from the relationship while the other species is neither harmed nor helped. Okay, so it's kind of a neutral effect on that particular, on the other species. Okay, so an example of this would be birds and trees. Okay, so they are going to be interacting with one another. Between the bird and the tree, which one is being benefited in this scenario? You tell me. Based on what we see in this picture, which one is getting benefited here? Yeah, so Kimberly says the bird. That's absolutely right. So the bird is going to be able to create a nest. And so when the bird creates a nest from the twigs and the trees that are around, or the branches that are around, okay, it's going to build its nest inside the tree. And what that's going to do is it's going to give the bird a home. Okay, it's going to be able to protect its eggs and protect its offspring. It's going to be able to protect itself, and it's going to be a place that it can be pretty safe. Okay, then to create a safe haven essentially for itself. Okay, now this isn't going to impact the tree in any way. Okay, because the tree is not going to be affected by this. It's not going to affect the tree's ability to perform photosynthesis. The breaking of the branches doesn't affect the tree's ability to survive. Okay, the tree is not getting affected by this in any way. Okay, so the tree is neither helped nor harmed here Okay, and building the nest doesn't do anything for the tree, but it does help the bird in this case. So this would be a commensalistic relationship where the bird species benefits while the tree is not helped or harmed in either way. Perfect. Okay. The next type of relationship is called a mutualistic relationship, and this is where both species will benefit. Okay? And so one of the kind of classic examples is with the rhino and the oxpecker bird. Okay? And so rhinos, when they kind of live in the prairie or wherever they are, they're pretty susceptible to ticks. Okay? And so you have these tick bugs that will come onto the rhinos, and they'll start eating the skin of the rhino. Okay? And that's pretty irritating to the rhino. It can cause lots of infections. It can cause a whole host of different problems for the rhino. Okay? And so it's really annoying to the rhino essentially to have all these ticks on it. Okay? And so what happens here is these oxpecker birds will kind of fly in. They'll just sit on top of the rhino and they'll eat the ticks. Okay, and so this is a mutualistic relationship here, because on one hand, the oxpecker is getting some food by eating the ticks, okay? And the rhino is not being exposed to any more ticks because the birds are going to be eating it. Okay, and so the rhino is going to be protected here because it's not going to be constantly being kind of munched at by all of these ticks. Okay, so kind of a double-edged, or kind of a double benefit here, a double positive. Okay? The oxpeckers are benefiting as well as the rhinos because they're not being exposed to the ticks anymore. Okay. Another example are kind of bees and flowers. Okay? And so when bees go and pollinate the flowers, is kind of a mutualistic relationship as well. The bees go to the flowers looking for food. Okay, so they're able to eat there. Okay, and then as they eat, they're going to have some of that pollen dumped on it from the flowers, and then from there, the bees will be able to transfer that pollen elsewhere. Okay, so that's going to help the flower be able to reproduce. Okay, so again, two benefits. Okay, the bee gets some food, the flowers get a chance to reproduce. Okay, so both are benefiting from that relationship. Okay, anyone have an idea of any mutualistic relationships that happen inside the human body? Okay. This one you may or may not be aware of. Does anyone have an idea of a mutualistic relationship within the body? Okay, between two different species? Anyone have an idea? So one of the mutualistic relationships that happen inside the human body is with our own gut bacteria. Okay? So in our digestive tract, we have lots of bacteria there, okay, that are good bacteria. They're considered good bacteria because they help with the digestive process. Okay, and so when we eat food, okay, we eat some food. Some of that food that we ingest is going to be absorbed by our bodies, and we're going to be able to store that as energy. Some of that food is not going to be absorbed, but it's going to be consumed by some of the bacteria in the digestive system. Okay, and that again helps the digestive system to work properly. Okay, now at the same time, our gut bacteria are able to utilize those resources, utilize that food source. That also prevents any bad bacteria from having resources for food as well. Okay, so if we're eating, we may also be consuming some bad bacteria that we don't want. Okay, so let's say we do get some bad bacteria inside of our GI tract. Okay, what the good bacteria will do is they're going to be better at utilizing those food sources. Okay, they're going to be sucking up all that food and not leaving anything left over for any of the bad bacteria. Okay, and so the bad bacteria will end up dying and getting pooped out later. Okay, so that's kind of one way of kind of a mutualistic relationship where we're able to consume some food and then some of the food is able to be delivered to our good bacteria, and at the same time, that's going to prevent the bad bacteria from growing too, okay, in an ideal scenario. Okay, so those are mutualistic relationships. The last type of relationship is called the parasitic relationship, and this is where we have parasitism. This is where we have a parasite that feeds off of a host without killing it, okay, without immediately killing the host. Okay. And so this is a scenario where you have one organism or one species that is benefited while at the same time harming the other species. Okay. And so the classic example of this is where we have a tapeworm inside the human gut. Okay. So this tapeworm is a parasite. Okay. And so when we eat, okay, let's say we've ingested a tapeworm as well. Let's say when we eat, the tapeworm is going to be consuming a lot of the nutrients that our body should be taking up. Okay. So when we're eating, we normally should be absorbing a lot of those nutrients, but none of them are getting absorbed because they're all getting absorbed by the tapeworm. Okay, so the tapeworm is getting benefited, and at the same time, it's harming us because we're not going to be able to absorb any nutrients because it's all getting sucked up by the tapeworm. Okay. Another example is with Plasmodium falciparum, which is the protist that causes malaria. And so what happens with this particular protist is that it'll live inside kind of either the human liver or inside the red blood cells. And then it'll kind of live off of the host that way, while also producing malaria in the individual. Okay? And so again, it's able to help itself and benefit itself by utilizing the resource and the nutrients. And at the same time, it's going to be causing malaria. Yeah. So Jack's question is, what is this photo? So this is a tapeworm inside the human gut, inside the one of the intestines or something. Yeah. So this is yucky. Not something that we ideally want to have, but this does happen. Yeah. Oh. All right. Any questions on any of these three relationships here? Okay. All right. So now as we kind of shift gears again, we're going to be looking at the different characteristics that make up each individual community. Okay. And so communities are going to be pretty much defined by two things. Okay. Number one, they're going to be defined by their structure, which is the different populations, the numbers of the populations and the size of the populations inside the communities and how they interact with one another. Okay. As well as the dynamics of that population. Okay, that's essentially how the members of the community are going to interact with one another and how those interactions are going to be changing over time. Okay, and so being able to understand these community structures and dynamics and be able to study them and learn about how they're working as they are is really important, because that allows ecologists to be able to understand what's going on in that ecosystem. And then if there is kind of something detrimental happening in that ecosystem or something that needs to change, then we can kind of step in and then help to assist the ecosystem and kind of do a few things to help manage the ecosystem a little bit better, so that all those interactions are able to happen a little bit more smoothly across the board. So that's typically what our ecosystems are going to be doing here, and what we're going to be doing as community ecologists. Okay? We want to be able to predict some of the different events that can take place, and then step in before different types of detrimental things can happen in that community. Okay. So when we take a look at the characteristics of all these communities, one of the things we're going to be really looking for is the biodiversity. Okay? And so the biodiversity is the number of different species that live in a particular area, okay? As well as the relative abundance of that species. Okay? So this is what we kind of measure as the species richness. So species richness is just the number of species that live in a particular habitat. Okay? So for example, if you go just into your own backyard, the species richness probably isn't going to be that high. It's probably going to be, just a few squirrels, or some squirrels. You might have some birds, a few trees, and some grass. It's not probably going to be a whole lot of species richness. But if you were to go into like the rainforest or the redwood forest or whatever it may be, okay, then you're probably going to see a more kind of expansive species richness. You're going to have a lot more variety of species available. Okay. And so typically, the species richness is going to vary across the world, but it's usually going to be a lot higher near the equator. Okay. So the species richness, you're going to have more species typically present near the equator than you will have, as you get closer and closer to the poles. Okay. So one of the things that we're going to measure in terms of biodiversity is the relative species abundance. Okay? So the relative species abundance is the number of individuals of a particular species compared to the total number of individuals of all the species living in that area. Okay? So basically, you take for example, the number of squirrels in this particular forest, and you compare that to the total number of all of the individuals of all the different species in that particular region. Okay. And so that gives us kind of an indication of how much of the diversity that one individual species accounts for, okay, in that habitat. Okay. And so typically, foundation species are going to be species that have the highest relative abundance, and we'll take a look at these right now. Okay. So does relative species abundance make sense before we go forward? Any questions so far? Okay. Okay. So the first type of species we're going to be taking a look at here are called foundation species. Okay. So foundation species, like we said, are typically have the highest abundance of all species in a particular region. Okay. And so these ones have a huge kind of a tremendous influence on the structure of a habitat. Okay. And so the reason for that is that these are usually going to be autotrophs. And so they're going to act as the base of the food chain. Okay, autotrophs, again, meaning that they're going to be able to perform photosynthesis. They're going to be the base of the food chain. And so everything is going to be kind of dependent on them. Okay. If you lose kind of the foundation species, it affects dramatically the other species as well. Okay. So it has the greatest influence on the structure of the habitat. Okay. And so what they do is that these are able to modify the environment in a way that helps to either maintain the habitat or adjust the habitat slightly so that it benefits all the other organisms that are present. Okay? So an example of a foundation species would be some coral. Okay? So this coral here is really important. We may think that it doesn't really serve a whole lot of a function, but it actually does serve a really important kind of role in the communities. Okay? What it's able to do is it's going to be able to protect smaller fish from very large and very kind of heavy waves and ocean currents. Okay? And in addition to that, it's also going to be able to provide a little bit of a home for some of these different fish as well. Okay? So this coral is going to be, widely found throughout the habitat, and it's going to provide lots of protection for the different species that are present in there. Okay? So foundation species, like we said, they're going to be usually the most abundant of the organisms here. Okay. Now, the flip side of foundation species are what we call this question is, what happens if all of the coral bleach like they are now? So coral bleaching, I'm not too familiar with coral bleaching, but essentially, if I'm understanding it correctly, and I may be wrong about this, so don't take my word for it. But essentially, if the coral get bleached, okay, then they are just not able to do exactly what they need to do. They're not in an environment that is conducive to their survival as well. And so if the coral are not able to survive, that's going to affect how all the other organisms that are available to them, how all the other organisms are going to be able to survive too. Okay. So it affects the coral survival. It affects kind of their own individual kind of structure and how their own health. And if the coral are not as healthy, that's going to affect in a detrimental way the other species that live with it. Okay. Oh, very good question. Okay. Any other questions here? Okay, so Jared says he remembers reading about how the pH or something of the ocean is starting to raise above their tolerance level. Yes, absolutely. And so that's kind of where global warming kind of comes into play. So without kind of getting into kind of the whole kind of the science, the sciencey stuff behind it, because it gets complicated. But essentially, when the pH gets too acidic, or it gets too low, it affects the coral. Okay, and so when the coral get affected, like I said, it starts to affect pretty much everything else. It causes the temperature of the ocean to increase, and that causes shifts in the types of animals that are able to survive in there. Okay? And so it affects kind of a whole lot of population sizes. It affects communities as a whole. It affects the entire ecosystem. So it really causes a whole lot of problems, all because of an issue that happens specifically in the ocean that really comes from the atmosphere. So there's a whole lot of levels to it. But yeah, so ocean, when the ocean pH changes, it causes a series of changes that affect all of the different organisms inside that particular ecosystem. Okay? And so that's part of the reason why, as humans, one of the things that we need to be able to do is we need to kind of be aware of the impacts of what we're doing and how that's going to impact not just the nature around us, but affect the ecosystems in the ocean. Because a lot of the things that we use on a day-to-day basis, a lot of our food sources come from the ocean. And so if we start to lose those particular individuals, it affects a whole host of different things. Okay, I'm getting kind of that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. You can do like another 5-10 lectures just based off of that. So it does. There's specific level. There's levels to it, and it affects kind of everything at multiple different levels. Yeah, really good. Any other questions here? Okay. So the flip side of foundation species is what we refer to as keystone species. Okay. So keystone species, in comparison to the foundation species that we saw before, they're going to be found in low abundances. Okay, they're not going to be that prevalent. They're going to be found in pretty low numbers. However, they have a significant influence on the other species in the area, in the ecosystem. Okay, so they have a significant influence on the other species. They have a significant influence on the structure of the community as well as the biodiversity. Okay, and so what we typically see here is that if you remove a keystone species out of an ecosystem, it drastically changes what that ecosystem looks like, and usually for the worse. Okay, and so keystone species are going to be really important. Paul says like wolves, and yes, and I'm actually going to hit on that on the next slide here. So I like where your head's at. So these are species that are found in very small numbers, but they're so important to maintaining the structure of the ecosystem that if you remove them, it drastically changes the abundance of everything else. Okay? And like I said, usually for the worse. So an example of this would be sea stars and mussels. And so sea stars we normally see kind of sea stars and we're like, oh, how cute, they're so nice, they're so pretty, yada yada. But sea stars are actually pretty vicious predators in the marine world. So I have a couple videos here that you can watch later, and if we have time at the end today, we can probably watch these as a group if we want to. But these are sea stars, and so sea stars are pretty vicious predators. And so what they'll do is they'll go to a bunch of mussels. They'll break open the shells of the mussels, crack them open, and they'll kind of release their stomach into the mussel, okay, and then suck out kind of the mussel's kind of main body. Okay. But then again, if you remove the sea star from the population or from the ecosystem, okay, it drastically changes everything else. Okay. The mussels become in very high abundance. And that causes a whole host of other things. It causes the different aspects of the ocean to change. It causes a number of different factors to change in the ecosystem. Okay. So those are the sea stars, and then wolves are also going to be a very important part of the ecosystem too. So here we're looking at a keystone species, which are wolves inside the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Okay, so here I've got a bunch of stuff written down, but I actually want to have you guys watch this video first before we get into all this stuff, because I think it's going to be much more profound if you kind of watch it for yourself rather than me kind of telling you what happened. So I'm going to insert the link here. Okay. So I'm gonna have you guys watch this first link. Okay. And on that link, there is a video that kind of shows what happened with the wolves inside the greater Yellowstone area. Okay, so it's about a 5-minute video, so take about the next 5-6 minutes to watch this video, and then when you're done, either write done or write you're back or whatever it may be, when you're finished with the video, and then come back here. Okay, so if you haven't already muted yourself, go ahead and mute yourself. We'll take about 5 minutes to watch, or 5-6 minutes to watch this video. And then when we're done, just either write done or back, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about what happened. Okay, so go ahead and go for it. And then, yeah, we'll come and we'll talk about this in a second. All right, so I'll go ahead and mute myself as I watch the video as well. Okay, we're going to take about another minute or so, and then we'll kind of explore this video a little bit here. Okay. Okay. All right. So based on this video, this is a pretty interesting video, right? Pretty cool. And so basically what happened was, just to kind of give you a little recap on the history behind it, the Yellowstone area initially had a lot of wolves present. And so the wolves were keeping the elk, the bison, and the rabbit species all kind of controlled. But as people started to populate that area, started to kind of build their homes there, the government was like, you know what, there's too many wolves here. We want to start building more populations. We want to start building more homes here. So these wolves got to go. This is kind of limiting our ability to be able to have people live here and make money and things like that. So what they did was they started killing a lot of the wolves. Well, what they did, by killing the wolves, they didn't really think, long term. They were just thinking of, what that was going to affect at that particular moment. And so when they killed the wolves, it caused the elk populations to now increase dramatically. Okay, so because the elk populations began to spike and skyrocket, because they were not being, kept, their levels were not being kept down by the wolves, the elk populations began to skyrocket, and it caused a lot more competition for the shrubs and the grass that they would be eating, and it caused lots of overgrazing. Okay? So because there was lots of overgrazing, okay, they weren't able to grow any more plants in that particular area because they were all being eaten by the elk. Okay, and now because there was a lack of plants, then that caused an impact on the fish, the beaver, and the birds, because now there's not enough food for the birds and the beavers, and then the lack of plants, caused a lot of erosion that would take place inside the rivers, and so that would affect the fish. Okay. And then it also caused the soil and the sediment to not be as anchored down, and so the soil would start to deposit itself into the oceans, or start into the streams, and so it would cause lots of erosion inside the streams. And then because there were so few so few trees, the trees, which normally gave some shade to the lakes and the rivers around, would keep the temperatures down. But because there were so few trees around, the water temperatures began to increase, and that affected the water species. Okay, so just by getting rid of the wolves, it created a whole chain of events that basically almost really had a tremendous, a very deleterious effect, or detrimental effect, on this ecosystem here. Okay, and so once they started to realize back in the 1990s, almost 100 years later, okay, we created a whole lot of problems by getting rid of these wolves. They reintroduced the wolves, and then all these problems reversed and went away. Okay, and so we can see the importance of having these wolves in this ecosystem, because not only do they keep the populations of the elk and the rabbits and the bison down, but that also creates a whole other chain of events that are able to be maintained in that particular ecosystem as well. So really, really cool thing about the keystone species here. They're really, really important for ecosystems to be able to survive as they do. So Paul's question is, are all apex predators keystone species? I want to say yes. I don't want to say all of them, just because there's probably exceptions to the rule in most cases, or at least in some cases. But I feel like most apex predators are keystone species. Okay? Again, if you get rid of a lot of those top predators in these ecosystems, it affects everything else, and it can create some significant changes in the ecosystem. So I want to say yes, but I don't want to say all of them. Most of them probably are. Most, if not all. Yeah. Good question. Any other questions here? All right. So there's another video here that kind of goes into a little bit more detail as in terms of the ecosystem. You guys can watch it on your own time too. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and go forward here. But any other questions on the keystone species or foundation species? No. All right, cool. Okay. So sorry, keystone species. Okay, so question here. So an important species of the Chesapeake Bay community is the Virginia oyster, which helps form large reefs that provide small fish and marine invertebrates with shelter. Which of the following best describes the role of the Virginia oyster in the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem? Are these foundation species, invasive species, keystone species, or pioneer species? What do we think? Yes. So Kimberly says A, and Jackie says A as well, and that is correct. These are foundation species. Yeah. So this acts as foundation species. They're going to be found in pretty large amounts, but they're going to be pretty helpful for the entire community. Okay. Next one. So which is true, or which is a true statement regarding a keystone species in an environment? So A, they reduce the biodiversity within an ecosystem. B, they are non-native species that outcompete organisms for resources. C, they promote stability in an ecosystem. Or D, they always have the largest number of organisms in an environment. Yeah, so Ryan says C, Jackie says C, Kimberly says C, yes, and C is correct. They promote stability in the ecosystem. They keep everything as they should. They keep everything in the appropriate levels and keep everything stable, okay? And to make sure that the entire ecosystem works properly, okay? Again, if you remove the keystone species out of the environment, okay, it causes an unstable nature of the ecosystem, and it causes everything to go haywire, and then things go crazy. Okay? So keystone species are important because they keep the stability of the ecosystem. Okay. Perfect. Okay. All right. So when we take a look at these communities, even though we might have a community that's at equilibrium, okay, which means that it's going to have a constant number of species, the species themselves may be changing over time, just like we saw last week when they're undergoing natural selection, migration, things like that. Okay. So the species themselves may be changing, but a community that's at equilibrium still has a constant number of species. Now, that being said, there can be some changes that take place inside a community. And so there can be changes inside the community structure. There can be changes inside the composition of the community. And so these can usually be due to different types of environmental changes or environmental disturbances. And things like forest fires, storms or hurricanes, volcano eruptions, floods. Okay. Different types of environmental changes can drastically affect the community structure and its composition. Okay. And so after that particular natural disturbance occurs, the community may or may not be able to return back to equilibrium. It may or may not go back to what it was before. Okay. So we're going to take a look at how this can take place. This is going to take place in what's called succession. Okay. Succession is kind of the appearance and disappearance of different species kind of over a particular period of time after a disturbance. Okay. And so we can have two different types of succession. Okay. We can have primary succession, or we can have secondary succession. Okay. And so in either of these two cases, really in both of these two cases, we're going to be seeing the disappearance and then appearance of different species over a time after some kind of natural disturbance. Okay. So the first type is called a primary succession. Okay. And so in primary succession, what happens is you have a new land that gets formed, okay, either by a volcano eruption or something like that when the land cools, or you have some land that gets weathered away or eroded, usually again due to some natural disturbance. Okay. Not something that's happened that's caused a change in the environment. Okay. The new land is formed. If the land gets weathered away or gets eroded, something happens. Now, when that particular kind of disturbance occurs, the first species to show up are going to be pioneer species. Okay. So pioneer species are usually going to be plants that are going to make their way onto that particular location, usually because the seeds have been blown over to that particular area. Okay. And so they establish themselves on that new land. Okay. So those are the pioneer species, these first plants that begin to show up after a disturbance. Okay. Now, over some time, some new species are going to make their way and start to arrive here, and they're going to outcompete the pioneer species and essentially replace the pioneer species on that particular location. Okay. Again, over time, that particular area is going to start to reach equilibrium, And as it reaches equilibrium, we end up with a whole new set of organisms that are completely different, or a whole new set of species that are completely different from what you initially had in the pioneer species. Okay. So you have a pioneer species that shows up. Okay. Eventually, other species show up and outcompete the pioneer species and eventually replace it, and you no longer have the pioneer species after a period of time. Okay. So that is primary succession. Okay. The second type is called secondary succession. Okay. And so in secondary succession, what we have is some kind of disturbance. So in this case, we have a forest fire. Okay. And so here we have a forest fire. We had to create a disturbance, and we end up destroying a large portion of the ecosystem. Okay. However, certain components of that initial community still remain. So we might have some seeds, we might have a few trees that are still around, or a few plants or something. Okay, something is still available. Okay. We're going to start to see some pioneer species again begin to show up here. Okay. And then we also have some intermediate species, which kind of look in between the pioneer species and the initial species that was initially destroyed. Okay. That's going to be the intermediate species. Okay. And then again, over time, we're eventually going to develop a climax community, which is going to form here. And that climax community is going to very closely resemble the community that existed before that disaster took place. Okay. So you're essentially ending up with what you started with at the beginning. Okay. So you have some kind of disaster, you have a fire, you have a pioneer species beginning to show up. Eventually, over time, we have some intermediate species which look kind of in between the pioneer species and the initial one. Okay. And then eventually you develop the climax community. Okay. And again, that climax community looks very similar to the community that existed prior to that disturbance. Okay. So here is kind of another kind of picture of what this looks like here. Here we've got a forest, another forest fire. Hey, again, we see some pioneer species beginning to show up. Okay. So after this forest fire, we had some only soil and then maybe a few seeds left around. Pioneer species like grasses and weeds began to show up. And then again, they get replaced by other shrubs and other trees and things like that, until eventually that location, that community looks very similar to what we saw at the beginning. Okay, we now reach equilibrium, and now we end up with our climax community that looks very similar to the community that existed before the disaster. Okay. Any questions on primary succession versus secondary succession? Okay, cool. All righty. Okay, so question here. So following the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, the surrounding area was devoid of life. Okay. After some time, some small lichens began to grow along the remaining soil. Okay, which of the following best describes this species of lichen? Would this be a pioneer species, a keystone species, an indicator species, or a climax species? What do we think here? Christopher says A. Jackie says A as well. Paul says A. Yes, and those would all be correct. So A is correct. So yes, this would be a pioneer species. Okay, this would be the first species that begins to show up after some eruption or some disturbance. Okay. Next question. So in 1998, a devastating fire destroyed a great deal of Yellowstone National Park. After many organisms were killed or displaced, existing redwood seeds began to immediately recolonize the park. After 50 years, those seeds develop into redwood trees. This is an example of which of the following. Okay. Would this be a natural selection, climax community, primary succession, or secondary succession? Yes, so D is correct. That's exactly. So this would be secondary succession. Okay, secondary succession, again, meaning those seeds are going to start to recolonize and restart growing into redwood trees. So yes, this would be secondary succession. Perfect. All right, good. That is everything for this particular semester. So any questions on anything we've covered today? So if there's no questions, that is it for the semester. Congratulations to you guys. You guys are all done. The classwork will be posted. I'll publish that in the next few minutes. But I just want to thank you guys for such a wonderful semester. I really enjoyed having all you guys in class. And it was a real treat. So I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I had a lot of fun teaching this class. So I will definitely miss you guys all. So again, thank you for being so awesome. I hope you guys learned as much. I hope you guys have a love for, at least have a new appreciation for biology if you didn't before. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Thank you for
that's it. I hope you love biology now. If you guys are not biology majors before, I hope you at least have a new appreciation for it now. So false question is the homework going to do tomorrow? So the homework from last week, if you haven't, thank you for bringing that up actually. So if you did not do the homework from last week, it has been reposted or kind of republished. So you should be able to get into it now if you didn't complete it again. So make sure you complete that by Friday. But yeah, so yeah, go ahead and take care of that. That'll be homework 14, I think it was, which was chapter 11. Complete that, and then that's pretty much it. And the classwork. If I will see you in lab, I'll see you in lab later today. So yeah, there isn't going to be one lab today. So the guys that are in the Thursday lab, there's going to be a very short lab today. So I'll see you guys then. But for everyone else, this will be the last time we're all together. So I will miss you guys all greatly. Like I said, it's been a wonderful semester, and I really appreciate you guys being so awesome this semester. And I know this wasn't easy, with this whole COVID thing and having to do everything online, but you guys have been champs about it. So I appreciate you guys all. So shout out to you. Give yourselves a pat on the back. You guys made it. And best of luck on the final next week. If you guys have any questions, like I said, feel free to email me and I'll do what I can to take care of you guys. Cool. All right. So I'm glad you guys liked the class. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. So I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys all. Okay. So if you guys have no questions or if you guys have any no more comments, you guys are free to go. And then I will, if you guys are in lab, I'll see you guys in lab later today. If not, best of luck on the final. Okay. All right. Take care.